ERP implementations in small and mid-sized companies. Can cloud and ERP and AI really drive sustainability? And are you overpaying for your technology consultants? Those are just a few of the topics we'll cover here in episode 221 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 221. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And this is the tech agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital transformations, including the people, process, technology, and strategy sides of technology and transformations. You can learn more about Third Stage Consulting by going to thirdstage-consulting.com. And joining me today, as always, is our co-host, Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes, we have a fun episode planned for you today. We're going to get into a lot of interesting topics. We'll get into some questions on social media. We'll get into some interesting newsworthy topics. First one being, can cloud ERP and AI really drive sustainability? And we'll also talk about whether or not the U.S. can keep its AI edge over China. Some might argue that China has the edge over the U.S. already, but we'll open that up for discussion and have that conversation here in just a moment. And then later in the show, we'll have two guests joining us, Nate Stroeher and Geordie McDougall from the Third Stage Consulting team. We're going to talk about ERP implementations and lessons for small and mid-size businesses in particular. So if you're part of a smaller mid-market organization, you won't want to miss this interview because we're going to talk about ERP implementations as it relates specifically to smaller and mid-market types of companies. And then later in the show, last but not least, we'll talk about whether or not you might be overpaying for your technology consultants. And spoiler alert, the answer is probably yes, you probably are. So we're going to give you some advice on how not to spend so much money on expensive technology consultants, which may sound weird coming from a technology consultant like myself, but we want to help you save money. So we'll talk about that later in the show here today. But before we get to our guest and our other topics, what are some of the questions we've received recently on social media, Darian?
Yeah, lots of great questions and comments recently. This first one is agreeing with your LinkedIn post. So they say 100% Eric Kimberling, but why do so many organizations still fall into the same pitfalls? Is it that CEOs and MDs aren't aware, or that CIOs and CTOs are only focused on implementing a tech solution? So when the light comes on or at go live, it's taken as a success. Unfortunately, I believe it's the latter, and convincing the CEOs and MDs that everything is fine.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty loaded question, a good question, but very, very interesting question that is very relevant to a lot of organizations. I mean, it's first of all, how do you define success? I mean, is success for your project, is it to turn on the technology, to this person's point, or is it to really improve and transform your business? And if it's to improve and transform your business, then yeah, you've got to measure accordingly and set the expectations accordingly that, hey, we're not here just to implement new technology. This isn't just a Windows upgrade or a simple refresh. This is kind of an overhaul of our business processes and our technology stack. So really educating the CI or the CEOs and the MDs and other leaders within your organization, just educating them and make sure they understand what that means is a really important part of what makes these projects successful or not. We spend a lot of time with companies, at the executive level, especially myself. That's usually where I get involved, is at the executive steering committee level. And you end up having to give them uncomfortable trade-off decisions that they have to make in the executives. That's a good way for executives to better understand what this means to their business. So in other words, rather than just saying to the executives, hey, this is more about people and processes than it is technology. Well, the executive doesn't really understand what that means. They probably don't really care. I mean, they just want this project to be successful and they want to grow their business. So rather than beating them over the head with the idea that technology is not the most important part of this project, you sort of have to give them the trade-offs of, well, if we do view it as just a technology project, here's what the outcome will be. If we treat it as a true transformation, this is what the outcome will be and what the trade-offs and risks are, and let them understand what that means and be more actively involved in the decision making. So that's just some word of advice for companies that might be struggling with that same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Our next question comment is also from LinkedIn. This one is, in today's world, I would strongly question the need to customize, not configure ERP unless one, it provides an extreme competitive advantage, and two, you have the budget and internal tech staff and or infra, think multiple work environments to support it effectively. And those are not cheap. 20 years ago, maybe, but today, question mark. I would question why 5 times.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, I agree. You don't need to customize. A lot of what companies are customizing is a lot of what companies do with customization is not warranted. It's not necessarily. A lot of times, it's a symptom of a deeper problem, like resistance to change. A lot of times, companies don't want to change, so therefore, they want to change the software. And sometimes they need to. I mean, that's the hard part of this is that you can't. I can't remember the last time I've seen a client where they were able to say 100% there's no customization and been able to stick to that, because there's always something that comes up during these projects where the software doesn't quite fit what your needs are, and that's okay. I mean, you would expect that, because if your business is at all different from other companies that are out there, then you're going to have that need or that tension between the way the software works and the way you want it to work. The problem is when you overdo it and you start customizing things that there was no business value, no justification. You could change that part of your business to conform to the software and it would be okay. But there are parts of your business that are probably secret sauce, competitive advantage type things, and you wouldn't want an off-the-shelf software to be able to do exactly the way you do it, because that would mean it's not a competitive advantage. So I think you just have to recognize and be careful and be deliberate about how you separate the two, but recognize that, yeah, you can strive for minimizing customization, but you're probably not going to get rid of it completely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to switch gears a little bit here and get into our first newsworthy topic of the day. This first one is about something we don't really talk about that often, but it's about sustainability. In a recent Forbes article from SAP, they dive into how fusion of cloud, ERP, and AI is becoming a powerful tool in helping companies hit their sustainability goals. Here's what I kind of found interesting in this article. First, these tools are offering real-time visibility into environmental impact, tracking emissions, resource usage, and waste at operational level. Second, it's not just about reporting. AI can help predict inefficiencies, suggest improvements, and automate compliance with environmental regulations. And third, it's not charity work. By reducing waste and optimizing operations, companies are also seeing real cost savings and better decision making. But here's the catch. In theory, it sounds good, but the challenge is how many companies are actually implementing this correctly and well. First of all, Eric, where do you see the biggest operational wins when companies use AI and ERP together for sustainability? Is it supply chain or energy use, waste, or is it somewhere else?
Well, I think right now it's from what we're seeing, it's more supply chain based, mainly because in the short term, that seems to be a pain point for more organizations, especially or ever since the pandemic, ever since COVID in 2020, that sort of disrupted supply chains quite a bit. And now, of course, with the US and China and other countries getting involved in trade wars, or in the case of the US, creating a trade war, you've got disruption to supply chains there too. So I think in the short term, using AI to help identify vulnerabilities in the supply chain and risks in the supply chain is probably more important. But longer term, I know, especially in Europe, where ESG regulations are going into effect as we speak, longer term for regulatory reasons and just based on where the world is headed, I think AI could really be even more important for sustainability efforts. I mean, if you think about all the ways that AI could inform us or help us understand ESG type stuff, environmental sustainability stuff, that's where AI can help us understand, the science and deciphering, what we're doing to impact, what our impact on the environment is and what we can do to improve it and that sort of thing. So I think it's a pretty powerful tool that will actually fuel the adoption of ESG type stuff. But I just think in the short term, supply chain pain and operational pain seems to be the bigger thing that companies are focusing on.
For sure. And if a company does want to implement technology like this, what would be their first step to take?
Well, with the ESG and the environmental and sustainability type stuff, a lot of companies aren't tracking and don't have data on this stuff now. So I think a lot of it is going to be getting the data and kind of pulling the data out of your operations or starting to create the data that will allow you to track those sorts of things. So in other words, like, you think of, we were talking about supply chain. So this just pops in my head as an example. But if you think about a supplier scorecard in a supply chain management system, now you might start looking more deliberately at what their ESG ranking would be, their rating would be. What is their sort of commitment to ESG, and does that fit your commitment? And let's just say you're trying to optimize your ESG outcomes and your impact on the environment. You probably want suppliers that share in that too, just because that'll help you fuel that focus. So I think getting the data and getting data from suppliers or from wherever you might get ESG types of data throughout your supply chain. I think you need to start capturing that and gathering it now, so that you eventually can start using AI and tools like that to analyze it and understand it and give you recommendations on how to improve it.
For sure. And this kind of makes an interesting point. What would be the biggest barrier that you're seeing right now? Is it cost, culture, complexity? Is there something else that maybe is causing companies to not adopt this technology?
Yeah, I think data is one. Lack of reliable data on what your organization is doing in terms of carbon footprint or sustainability, whatever, however you measure that. So having the right data, I think, is probably a big challenge. But I also think it is somewhat cultural. Like in Europe and the EU, it's being mandated, so you don't really have a choice if you're operating in the EU. But in the US, we don't have those sorts of laws yet. I mean, I imagine we probably will eventually, but the EU tends to be ahead of us when it comes to regulations like that. So I don't know. I think that's, maybe a cultural thing. I think like in the US, I don't think people talk about it nearly as much as they do in Europe. I mean, when we deal with our European clients, you hear about ESG a lot more, even before these laws went into effect. So part of it's cultural. It depends on what part of the world you're in. And I think the bigger thing is data. I mean, if, like, for example, for us at Third Stage, if I want to set a goal, an ESG target for us, I wouldn't even know where to start in terms of measuring, like, what is our impact, on the environment. Like today, for example, I have to get an airplane later today. Does that mean I would measure that as somehow some sort of carbon, impact to the environment? The fact that I'm taking a commercial flight to go somewhere, and, I don't know. I don't have the data behind that. So you think about that sort of thing. I think you just having a clear plan of how you're going to capture that data, how you're going to measure it, how you're going to use tools to help you understand it and decipher it and do something about it. I think those are all barriers, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. It's super interesting. A topic that we definitely don't really touch on much. So it was an interesting article by them for sure.
Yeah, super interesting.
Yeah, but we're going to get into our next newsworthy article of the day. This one is about the AI kind of race between US and China right now. So the Trump administration is moving forward to keep export controls on GPUs in place, continuing the restrictions originally set by Biden. At first, some expected Trump to ease up, especially with the anti-regulation stance, but instead it looks like the focus is shifting towards long-term US dominance in AI, especially when it comes to China. NVIDIA, I guess, now must get a license to export its powerful H2O chips to China. In short term, this probably won't change GPU prices much. Demand is still massively outweighs supply. But in the long term, the idea is that by limiting, the US can protect its national security and stay ahead in AI development. But some leaders say this could drive more innovation at home, while others say China will simply build its own high performance chips and catch up anyways. One quote that really stood out to me in this article was, close allies are getting first dibs on chips, but the line's long, and some are eyeing the Chinese truck across the street, even if the quality's uncertain. So what is the right call for national security? Is this the right call, or will it just push the rest of the world to diversify away from US tech, is kind of what this article was questioning. One question for you, Eric. Do you think that restricting GPU exports to China is necessary for long-term US AI dominance?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's the problem with this whole thread or this whole topic is that there's a conflict or a potential clash between what's best for innovation and just, free markets and, developing AI as innovatively as possible, regardless of who does it, whether it's US, China, or some other country or countries. So that's in conflict, obviously, with the whole tension between the US and China, aside from AI. So this isn't even really about AI. It's just more about geopolitical tension in general. And especially with Trump in office, that just creates more tension between US and China. So I don't know. I mean, honestly, I mean, if I were just looking at it from a perspective of innovation, I'd say, let China come up with these cheaper products. And even if it's not as good a quality, if they can drive costs down and create more cost pressure on the US to do the same, that generally is going to help innovation. But, obviously national security and geopolitical things are winning out here. And so those two things are in conflict. So I don't know what the right answer is, to be honest. I mean, because you can't really answer it in isolation without considering the fact that there's tension between the two. And I understand why the situation is what it is, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be good for innovation longer term. But having said that, I think there's plenty of innovation happening right now, so I'm not too worried about it. And I also don't think we're anywhere close to being able to keep up with the innovations as it is. So maybe that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think we talked about this before, but it seems like every week there's something new coming out with an AI, or some sort of new tech company is doing, or software is doing something new with AI. So I feel like every week we're talking about something new. So maybe innovation, like you said, slowing down isn't the worst thing, but also I see both sides as well, for sure.
I get messages all the time on LinkedIn, especially like people that have started an AI startup and they want funding or they want recommendations or consulting or whatever to get them started. So, I mean, these are people all over the world too. Like I get these messages all over the world of like, hey, we just started this company a year or 2, 3 years ago, and it's focused on AI, this or that, and just different. It's just interesting to learn about all these different niches and applications of AI. And I think there's plenty of innovation there. So I'm not too worried about it.
For sure. How do you think that CIOs should think about supply chain risk and planning when AI infrastructure is kind of caught in this geopolitical battle?
Yeah, I mean, I think diversification and hedging is really important. And then maybe that's what you're alluding to, or what we might see in the U.S. is, people might start diversifying outside the U.S. Given this, and they might also diversify outside of China too. But that creates an opportunity for other tech hubs to get a seat at the table here too. I think of places like Ireland, for example. I know Ireland invested heavily in the technology sector with tax breaks and just trying to build a robust technology ecosystem within Ireland. So you think about that as an example. Like, could Dublin and Ireland become kind of a new hub for technology and sort of, they're not stuck in the middle of this whole trade battle and the tension between the US and China. So maybe that's an opportunity for them to step in and take more market share. So I think it creates a lot of opportunity. Or you look at Saudi Arabia too. I know Saudi Arabia is investing super heavily in technology and their infrastructure, and they're trying to keep as much of that spend at home as they can, using local technology providers and things of that nature. So I think you'll start to see more companies invest in their own technology capabilities and infrastructure over time.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point. Yeah, great topics today. And I'm excited to get into this conversation with Nate and Geordie.
Yeah, we'll talk about small businesses and their ERP implementations, what are the pains that they typically feel as they think about upgrading their technologies? What are the options they have in the marketplace? What are the common pitfalls they fall into? We're going to cover all that stuff and more in this next discussion. It's going to be with Nate Stroeher and Geordie McDougall from the Third Stage Consulting team. And we're going to talk about ERP lessons from the small and mid-market clients that we've worked with over the years. And then later in the show, we'll also get into whether or not you're overpaying and how to know if you're overpaying for technology consultants. So be sure to stick around for that. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I'll give you anything to feel it coming. Do you wake up on your own? I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Well, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 221. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is produced by Major Tom Productions and sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. So we've got our guests here today joining us, Nate Stroeher and Geordie McDougall from the Third Stage Consulting team. They're going to join to talk about ERP implementations at small and mid-sized companies. We'll talk about how to know if it's time to look at technology upgrades, how to navigate all the options you have out there in the marketplace. And we'll also talk about some of the pitfalls you need to be aware of as you go through your technology journeys as a small or mid-market company. So with all that being said, Nate and Geordie, thanks for being here today. Nate, to start, why don't you introduce yourself, if you don't mind, and then we'll get to you, Geordie.
Great. Thanks, Eric. This is Nate Stroeher, and I am an associate director here at Third Stage and have a career in technology implementation, selection, have done a lot of change management throughout my career and have worked with various size businesses in the Colorado area, have worked with a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, and so have a lot of great lessons learned, both the good and the bad from our past clients, and look forward to talking to the group today about some of the stuff we've learned over the past few years.
Great. And then Geordie, how about you? Tell us a little bit about yourself, and welcome, and thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, so Geordie McDougall, I'm Associate Director at Third Stage Consulting Group. Also been in the technology transformation space for quite a few years now, working with Third Stage. And just like kind of what Nate was saying, have a background in selections, implementations, project remediations, where we'll kind of come in when things are starting to go south and take a look and try to, realign the project. Worked with a range of different industries as well as sizes of companies. So that's, the multinationals, the multi-billion-dollar revenue companies, all the way to the small businesses. So, really looking to diving into this conversation and seeing what the audience has for questions as well.
Yeah, great. Well, good to have you both here. And just a fun fact about Geordie, I've over the last 7 years of running Third Stage, I've had, easily over 100, maybe 150 different consultants that have been here over time. And I think you're probably the fastest rising consultant that we've had on our team ever, right? As far as just starting off as an entry level guy, and a couple years later, here you are as an associate director. So thanks for everything you do. And I'm looking forward to getting your guys' diverse opinions on this stuff here. So I guess just to get started, and I'd love to hear the questions that the audience has, but just to get us started here, and I'll start with you on this one, Nate, but if we just sort of back up at a high level to start, why do small businesses decide, in general, why do they decide they want to implement a new ERP system? Could you kind of describe, like, if there is such a thing, what is the typical small business situation, and what situation are they typically in when they come to us and say, hey, Third Stage, can you guys help us figure out our roadmap going forward?
Yeah, I think we see most organizations are on that the trajectory of building up their business to the point where they're starting to become scalable, and the manual processes that have put them where they are and have given the success for where they are have become now a crutch. They've become something that has held them back from scaling up to a larger size organization. So we traditionally see companies that are, I think we always hear the phrase where it's time for us to become, a technology-enabled big company. It's time for us to take our manual processes and get away from them holding us back, and get to the point where we can implement a technology that will allow us to grow and scale to the size they hope to be in the future.
Yeah, are most of them on QuickBooks or like some sort of basic accounting system, or is there sort of a base starting point that they typically are at?
Yeah, we see everywhere from some of the old Great Plains software. We see QuickBooks. We've had actually several real successful clients that have come from a fairly heavy tech Excel-based platform, and we've had a lot of homegrown systems. So it's really kind of a mix of where we're bringing our clients from to an ERP package. But for the most part, QuickBooks seems to be the platform that we see most often. QuickBooks has done a really good job, and other platforms have done a really good job getting organizations to where they need to be. But then they really find that curve is all of a sudden starting to flatten out, or even maybe go down now. And they're finding that manual processes are not only keeping them from growing, but they're just kind of stagnating the entire business as they grind through these manual processes.
Yeah. How about you, Geordie? When with the smaller clients that you work with so far, what are some examples or some typical starting points that they're at?
Yeah, typically you see them coming off of QuickBooks as well as many different Excel spreadsheets, and dealing with these different segmented systems or documents that they're working off of. It really stalls that growth, like what Nate was saying. And it kind of that goes in hand with that is, in today's day and age, customer demands seem to be getting higher and higher each year. So you look at companies like Amazon, where you can track, okay, this is where my package is. This is when I'm going to get it delivered, etc. So even the small businesses are getting held to that level of transparency and being able to provide that information. So as they grow, they're needing to shift off of these, QuickBooks solutions and Excel spreadsheets and get something that's a little bit more centralized so that they can provide the insight that, they're being held to, and that's expected from the customers at this day and age.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And it's sort of like they're at this inflection point where they got to where they got with QuickBooks or whatever their sort of base accounting system is. And now they're looking for ways to really scale and integrate the operations a bit more. So they've grown just enough to where they've sort of outgrown QuickBooks or whatever their base accounting system is. Here's a question. I knew we were going to get asked this, but I didn't know how fast we'd get asked this question. But we might as well get out on the table now, because I'm sure a lot of people are wondering this. But this is from David on LinkedIn. David says, what is your definition of small, medium, and large when it comes to these sorts of enterprises? Nate, what do you think of this? I always struggle with this definition because I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, but how would you describe small versus mid-size versus large?
I think we can go, if we're talking about the looking at it in the perspective of number of employees. I think we go from anywhere from 50 employees for a small business up to a medium-sized business, about 200 to 300 employees. And then again, that's a little bit deceiving because there's a lot of organizations out there that can make a lot of revenue with a small amount of employees. I think also we talk about small businesses anywhere from about 10 million to 100 million is kind of that small to medium-sized business. I hate to throw numbers out there, and we I think you'll probably agree with this, Eric and Geordie. It's really kind of kind of your best guess as far as how you would define those, but that's traditionally who we work with for the most part. But then we see some organizations that are in the 200 to 300 million that are still kind of in their infancy. So it's really more the organization by organization way to look at it.
Yeah, what industry you're in has a lot to do with it. You could have a number of employees too. A lot of times that's a better indicator because you could have a company with 10 employees doing a couple $100 million in revenue because you're a distribution or some sort of low margin company. So it's a little misleading. Revenue alone is a little misleading without looking at employee base. We do have one thing I'll share too, just speaking while we're on the topic of what small versus big is in terms of business size. We actually have a free small business assessment that we offer to companies that are under 75 million in revenue. So I'm not saying that's the hard and fast rule. I tend to agree. It's like under 100, I would consider small. 100 to maybe half a billion might be mid-size, and then once you get above 500 million to a billion and above, that's where we would consider that larger enterprise. But if you'd like to do that free assessment, by the way, since I brought it up, if you scan the QR code right here on the top left side of your screen, if you're a small business doing less than 75 million in revenue, we do a free technology assessment for you in terms of figuring out what your path forward might be and what some of your options would be. It's a tech agnostic approach. So scan the QR code if you want to learn more about it. And if you're listening to this after the fact, you can check out the QR or the links in the description field below. So I'll leave that up for a second and let you scan that and check out that assessment and schedule time to do that. So back to some audience questions or comments here. This is from Matt on LinkedIn. Matt says, I can see the pain of scaling manual processes is definitely a big trigger. So definitely can relate. It sounds like he can relate to that comment there too. And here's a question. I'll start with you on this one, Geordie. This is from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, what are some signs that a business has officially outgrown QuickBooks or Excel? So when you've worked with some of these smaller companies that have had, some of the challenges they've had, and they've come to us with a lot of times they come to us knowing or recognizing that they have the pain already. But what are, some of the signs that you see or that our team sees that they might have outgrown their systems?
I think just having an understanding of different areas within your organization. So one example I think of is, a distribution company, them not having full access to their inventory availability. They're having to click around to different areas to try to track down, what do they have on hand, what's available, and even knowing when it will be available if it's not currently available to their clients. So just having to click around and look at many different, Excel spreadsheets like Darian mentioned, or even not being able to fully trust that their data is correct either. Once you start scaling very quickly and it's very manual, it's much more difficult to ensure and be able to trust that your data is actually correct and that you can make informed decisions based off of that. So the scalability definitely is a big piece that kind of lets them know that QuickBooks or Excel is starting to get a little bit outgrown. You have maybe Deb that owns this one Excel spreadsheet, but she only has a certain amount of hours in a day. So once you start to scale past that availability that she has, that's another really big sign.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So first of all, I'm curious to hear from the audience. For those of you that are working for owners of a small business, what kind of technologies are you guys using? I'd love to hear just sort of your general lay of the land situation. It's always helpful to hear where others are starting from and, what sort of pain points you might be facing as it relates to the systems you have. So drop in the chat just any feedback you have on your current situation as it relates to systems you're using and signs of outgrowth or pain related to those systems. But while the audience is answering that question, Nate, how do the needs and challenges of small businesses differ from the mid-size and larger organizations? Because I think, a lot of what we're going to talk about here and what we have been talking about so far today is relevant whether you're a small company or large company. I mean, there's some certain things that is sort of universal across company size, but what are the things that are different, in terms of a smaller company that's about to go through an ERP implementation versus a larger one? What are the big differences?
Well, I think you can break it down in two different ways. And I think, first of all, it's the challenges that lead you to needing to change for the ERP. And that it really, I think the biggest thing that we see is the lack of ability to scale. So you have, again, a lot of manual processes being chased down, and your labor pool is just getting to the point where you could continue to throw people at the problem, or you could get technology and you could start to address it that way so that you scale using technology instead of just adding bodies to the problem. I think when we go to an implementation, the biggest challenge is just having the right resources and having the right amount of resources to dedicate to this change. It seems that a smaller organization, as opposed to a medium to large organization, you have people that are a lot more specialized. So you have a lot more ability to put resources on these projects and have their expertise really dedicated to the project. When you have small and medium-sized businesses, you've got a lot of people wearing a lot of different hats, and they've got their day job. We always go back to, you have your 9 to 5 responsibilities and you're trying to do these implementations. So it seems like really the smaller and medium-sized businesses usually tend to know a lot of what they're doing. So it's really a nice luxury that you have, in the sense that they know a lot. If you're in a small and medium-sized business, just by the nature of your business, you know a lot of what's going on throughout the entire organization. You're not really siloed. But on the flip side, you got a lot going on, got a lot on your plate. And then to try and add a technology implementation makes it really difficult.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, even a larger business, we work with everything from small businesses under 75 million. We work with some multi-billion-dollar global organizations. And even if we look at those large clients that we work with, they struggle enough as it is to find the right resources internally to support these projects. But I agree with you that the small businesses are even more constrained, just because, people are wearing so many hats and you just have less resources available. So just recognizing that and being aware of that's really important, because you're not going to shut down your business. You probably don't want to shut down your business while you're going through this ERP implementation. So you've got to pace yourself. And the software vendors typically will come to you and say, hey, we can slam in this new system really fast, which in theory they can. It's just not going to go well. It's not going to be, if you don't get your people involved and get them involved the way they need to be. So that's really interesting. So what are your thoughts, Geordie? Anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I would say, just based on the resource constraints, it's very important just to prioritize how you want to roll out this transformation. Like you said, vendors might come in and give you this magic number like 6 months and everything can be done. But how's that going to affect your day-to-day business? Can you really afford to shut down your business and lose out on some revenue that's, keeping your lights on currently? So looking and really trying to prioritize and understanding how many resources you do have available and who can be backfilled if possible. I mean, that's obviously ideal if you can train up someone that might be below a big resource that needs to get pulled into the project, so that you can backfill that role. But if you can't, then phasing out the project and making sure that you can really target your focus on your day-to-day job, but also on the project, to ensure that it's that smooth transition is very key to be able to make sure that, the business keeps running, but you're also, taking steps in the right direction for this transformation to then, enable efficiency and all these other good things that are going to come from it. Yeah.
Well said. I want to get to some of the comments here from the audience. This is from Matt on LinkedIn. Matt says, one of the signs of outgrowing the systems is when the CFO wants a one-touch monthly report for the whole business. And that's a great point, because, when visibility and business intelligence and just having knowledge and understanding of what's happening in your business day to day, that's something that oftentimes is missing, because QuickBooks isn't going to tell you sort of a projection or the forward-looking, demand planning and things like that. And so the ERP systems can provide a lot of other things that something like a QuickBooks can't in terms of providing that integrated visibility across functions and across different parts of your business. Jordan on YouTube says that Jordan's currently using Microsoft Great Plains, implementing Business Central currently. Very manual processes and heavy paper-based processes for a 15 to 18 million revenue light manufacturing and supplier of construction materials. So thank you for that. That's a great case study right there. I mean, you're 15 to 18 million. That seems to be the right in the sweet spot or right in the zone where a lot of companies say, hey, the system that got us here isn't going to be that same system that's going to get us from 15 to 18 million to 50 or 100 or whatever it is you're trying to get to in terms of your revenue. So in the paper-based processes too, I think that's another common thing we see in smaller businesses is the big companies have it too, but the smaller companies oftentimes built the entire company on manual processes. And so trying to figure out a way that you can automate and integrate that with new technology is kind of the utopia that we're all looking for. Here's an interesting question from David on LinkedIn. David says, who do you find is the main decision maker as to whether a transformation will proceed? Noting visible executive commitment and sponsorship is required for the implementation to succeed. So if we're talking about a small business here, and Geordie, maybe I'll start with you and see if you have thoughts here, but if you're talking about a small business, does that change in terms of how an executive sponsor or leader within the organization needs to be involved and support an ERP project or a potential technology replacement?
My initial answer would be no. I think that no matter what size of business you're working within, having that executive sponsorship or even just having that executive presence around to be able to communicate, this is why we're changing, this is the benefits of the transformation. And even understanding that it's not going to necessarily be easy, but it's something that the company is willing to invest in to make sure that, you can get towards your future goals or your future revenues that you're chasing. So I don't necessarily think that it matters on the size of the company. I do think that, executive teams are typically more hands-on in a smaller business. I think that's just something that you can kind of assume. But in terms of, the main decision maker, I think it still remains that project sponsor, the executive team that's really, being that guiding light and really kind of reiterating the reason and all the pros for the transformation.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think, Nate? Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I would just add, I think this will seem a little counterintuitive, but I think I totally agree with Geordie in the sense that executive leadership is a must, but I think it's that second level down that is really important, that you have a lot of buy-in from them and that you have a really clear, I call it chain of command, and that sounds a little army based, but that you have a real clear decision channel so that the executive sponsorship is needed to make sure that the project goes on and that everyone's bought into it. Then you need that second layer down that really are keeping all the divisions and all the departments focused, and they're the ones that are making the decisions for the organizations, but they're also the ones that are in charge of getting their troops underneath them marching in the same order. So I think that executive sponsorship, if you don't have that, you're likely to fail. But really that second level down is the level that provides the direction, the organization, and are really making the decisions for the entire project.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, that the executive leadership needs those agents below them and they need to really empower them to be decision makers. Oftentimes we'll see people will be at that second level, but might be a little uncomfortable with making these big decisions that are leading their company. So having that executive support and reassurance that, you are in this role for a reason and we empower you to make these decisions, obviously escalate them if it's something that needs to be escalated, but that's a key point there, Nate. I totally agree.
Yeah. And then you also get the dynamic of the founder-led organizations. Usually these smaller businesses are oftentimes the original founder is still the one running the company. And, that could be a good and bad thing, when it comes to these projects, because you need that person oftentimes who people are following. And oftentimes people have worked for that same founder, that same leader the entire time they're at the business. But you need that person oftentimes to be the face of the change, even if they're not involved. I totally agree with what you guys are saying, that you can rely on that next level down to sort of empower them, make decisions, that sort of thing. But you need that founder leader who probably has been making a lot of decisions for the organization over time. You still need them involved in getting their buy-in and really supporting the change within the organization. In which, speaking of that, kind of getting into this, keeping with this whole thread of internal buy-in and getting the employees of these smaller businesses involved in these projects. Matt on LinkedIn says, one key to success is the change readiness of the team on the floor, not just the readiness of the execs who might be driving the implementation and transformation. So it kind of gets to what you guys are saying is you need to get people involved outside of just, the CEO or the founder, even the next layer down. You need the frontline people that are doing this job every day. You need them involved to enable the change like that.
Yeah.
So here's a question from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian asks, what are the most common missteps small businesses make during this transition, and how can they avoid them? Let's start with you, Nate. What do you think there?
Well, I think, and this will go right back to the point that was just made. I think the most common is that we start all of our engagements off with an executive visioning. So whether it's a small organization, this session might be a couple hours. To some of our larger clients, we'll have a couple days that we'll work on this executive vision. But I think it's really important. And if you don't take this step, you're already starting off on the wrong foot. And that is getting the executive buy-in. So when you mentioned, Eric, that a lot of these organizations are founder-based and are founder-led still, it's really important to make sure the founder and the leader of the organization sets up a vision. The people below him understand the vision, and then all the way down to if it's a manufacturing organization, all the way down to the shop floor. So having the executive vision and getting that vision out and communicating really well with the organization, just exactly where you are, where you're going, how technology is going to get there, and then what that means to everyone. So how your job's going to be different, and what are the changes you're going to see over the next 6 to 12 months, be it on the shop floor, at an executive level, at a mid-level, just detailing for everyone what exactly that means. If you don't have that clear vision and that clear communication, you're going to find everyone, it's kind of like, let's go over there and that's your target, instead of let's go to this exact target and let's figure out how we're going to get there.
Yeah, kind of getting everyone to row in the same direction and preach from the same hymn book. Is that what's the cliche?
Yeah,
Sing from
exactly.
the same hymn book. I'm not terrible with cliches. I always find a way to butcher them. That's really interesting. That's well said. And I'm wondering, Geordie, when it comes to technology decisions and the way small businesses implement technology, are there any sort of missteps that are more common with smaller companies in terms of, taking on too much complexity or choosing the wrong system that doesn't fit their needs? Or, are there any things like around the technology itself that you see smaller businesses more likely to fall victim to?
Yeah, I would say just defining your requirements up front and understanding, what are your pain points and what are your requirements that you need a system to help you, do your day-to-day job. Sometimes when you look at a new software system or a vendor comes in, they'll tell you all these great new features and functionality that might not even be applicable to you at this point in your growth stages. So really looking back at, what are the pain points that you're working with? What are you trying to have this system help you to do your day-to-day jobs with, while also keeping in mind your future goals and your future growth. So you don't want to get a system that can work for you today, but maybe in 3 years you'll outgrow it again, because obviously these transformations are a pretty large lift to take on. So looking at the future, but also understanding your requirements and what you're really trying to enable the software to help you do.
Yeah. And that sort of brings up another follow-up point based on what Geordie said there, Nate, and that is, Geordie was just talking about defining requirements and the need to do that stuff up front. And so he sort of started to answer this question. We'll ask it anyway, just to dive into it in more detail. But when a small business is getting started on their technology journey, let's just say they've recognized the pain, they recognize that, hey, QuickBooks isn't working for us. So we know we need to go out there and get, say, an Oracle NetSuite or a Sage system or Acumatica, one of these smaller ERP systems or ERP systems built for smaller companies. But before you jump in and just go buy technology or go start getting demos and talking to vendors, what else should a small business do in addition to defining requirements to sort of get that strategy and roadmap in place and buttoned up first before you just start going out to buy technologies?
Well, I think it's important to what I alluded to earlier, getting understanding what that vision is, but also understanding where you are and where you're going to be in the future. So we have a client that we're working with now, and it's a great example for this podcast today. They're shifting their business right now. They're a very online based business. All their orders come in online. They have some come in over the phone, but they're really talking about kind of a shift in the way they're doing business. So it's really important to not only look at what your technology landscape is, but what your organizational capabilities are now, what technology you're going to need to implement in the future, what skill sets you're going to need in the future. It's important to know that just because your skill set is very well trained on how you're doing business now, your business is going to change. And that's the whole reason you're going through this transformation, is to try and scale and trying to adapt to the new business settings and the requirements that you're going to have in the future. So I think it's very important to say, what technology do we need to get in the future, but really looking at things as a whole and not getting very sideload of saying we're just doing an ERP implementation. You need to say this is part of a technology landscape and part of an organizational landscape that we're trying to support in the future.
Yeah, and you don't have to, even if you go with a modern ERP system that has all these different functions and features and capabilities, doesn't mean you have to implement it all at once. I mean, you could sort of go incrementally and pick off pieces of a system and implement it, especially if you look at I know one of the reasons why a lot of smaller companies like the product Odoo is because it's more of a modular based system that you can implement just pieces of the system. But then when it's time, you can also integrate those different modules, almost like Lego building blocks, if you will. And that could be pretty powerful because you don't necessarily need to take it all on all at once. And Matt on LinkedIn has a comment just building on Geordie, what you said, but Matt says exactly what Geordie just said. Clients will sometimes look for more functionality than they need, and that can cause problems that are unnecessary. And I think we're all saying the same thing. We're all in agreement there. You don't, the last thing you want is to go buy technology that doesn't allow you to scale. Instead, it creates more complications and more problems, and that actually lessens your ability to scale. And that's the last thing you want. And that's why you have to find a system it's tricky being a small business in this way, and that you have to find a system that's going to get you to another level, but not be such a big jump that it's overcomplicating things. So you need it to be something you can grow with, but you don't want something that's going to complicate things too much. And that's why, I think that's why SAP and Oracle, setting aside NetSuite for a moment, but Oracle Fusion and SAP S/4HANA, I think that's why they struggle with the small market, because their products are just too big, too expensive, too complex, and it just doesn't fit a lot of small businesses. Whereas there's a lot of NetSuites, Odoo's, Acumatica, Sage, a lot of smaller based ERP systems that can help. I'm here with Geordie and Nate from the Third Stage Consulting team. We're talking about ERP implementations at small and mid-sized companies. We've got a lot more to cover, but we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling, and I'm the CEO and founder of Third Stage Consulting. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to invite you to learn a little bit more about Third Stage Consulting, who we are and what we do. I've included a link to a video right here that describes Third Stage in a bit more detail. It talks about our story, our history, our philosophy, our clients, our service offerings, and that sort of thing. But in general, what Third Stage Consulting does is we're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting provider. We help clients through their entire digital transformation life cycles, beginning with digital strategy, software evaluation and selection, all the way through and including implementation planning, implementation readiness, and the actual implementation itself. We're technology agnostic, so we only represent our clients' best interests. We do not represent software vendors. But having said that, we work very closely with software vendors, all the leading players that you can imagine we've worked with, both in helping clients evaluate and select them, but also in helping clients implement those solutions as well.
So we have a very broad, objective, agnostic view of the market that is meant to really represent your interest as you go through your digital transformation. I also encourage you to scan this QR code right here to get access to our resource center. This resource center has a ton of information, ton of ebooks that are free. You have access to top 10 software rankings, playbooks for how to make your project more successful, guides to change management, YouTube videos, all kinds of stuff that are going to help you through your digital transformation. So I encourage you to scan this QR code to get access to those resources. And please feel free to reach out to me directly to brainstorm ideas about your project. Even if it's just informally, you want to bounce around some ideas and get some informal advice, I'd be happy to spend some time with you. So feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. You can also find it in the description field of this video as well.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 221. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this podcast every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. And you can also find this podcast on whatever podcast platform you prefer to listen or watch. Just search for Transformation Ground Control and you'll find us all over the place. We've got a couple guests here. We're talking to Nate and Geordie from Third Stage Consulting about ERP implementation lessons at small and mid-sized companies. Just because we love sharing information. See, the thing when you join these live streams, you're not just getting the guests, you're getting all kinds of resources that we're going to make available to you. So I want to, if you're interested in sort of seeing what some of the leading ERP systems are out there in the marketplace, scan this QR code right here on the screen. It's our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. So in that, we have a number of independent reviews and rankings of different systems out there in the marketplace, as well as other trends and just general best practices for making a project like this successful. So go ahead and scan that QR code if you'd like. You can download that for free off our website. And like I said, we're here not just to talk about this stuff, but we'll share as much as we can in terms of documentation and other resources that will help you. Here's another question from Darian on LinkedIn. And this is, how do you advise small teams to pace their implementation timeline when resources are tight and people can't just pause their day job? So let me give you guys a more specific example. And I hate to do this. I apologize to anyone here listening that might be from NetSuite, but I'm going to pick on NetSuite for a minute. And it's just because it's the first one that popped in my head. Quite honestly, there's no reason I'm picking on them in particular, but NetSuite has something called Suite Success, I think it's called, where it's sort of like a fast track implementation timeline. 90 days is oftentimes the timeline they'll give you and say, hey, we can implement NetSuite in 90 days. And we've seen it time and time again. Yes, NetSuite can implement their product in 90 days. I've seen it done. It's just a matter of, can your business consume NetSuite in 90 days? And that's the bigger question. And the answer to that is usually no. So let's assume here for a moment then that with NetSuite or any of these other ERP vendors, they're probably going to be able to implement technology a lot faster than you're going to be able to change as a small business. And keep in mind, these are small businesses that are relatively nimble and agile, and they move fast, or at least faster than their bigger counterparts. But still, even then, it's very difficult for these organizations to change that fast. So what are some advice or recommendations you might have, Geordie, on like, how do you add a dose of reality or a grain of salt to a vendor when they say we can do this in 90 days? And how do we set a timeline that makes the most sense for us as a business, not necessarily what the vendor thinks they can do?
Yeah, I think one key aspect, and there's many different answers and avenues you can go with this, but one that I'd mention is to try to align your implementation to match up with potentially a slow season that you might have. Many businesses have a busy season and a slow season. So trying to align your project plan to line up well with that slow season so that you can take on a little bit more outside work, such as a transformation project. Trying to align like your UATs or SATs with those slow seasons so that you can really sit in a room for a couple of weeks and really kind of dive into this while it's going on. If it's your busy season, you probably want to avoid it because that's going to bring a big disruption to your business. And also, like you mentioned, if you're implementing a system, but you're not going to fully be adopting it and using it, then kind of what's the point of the transformation then? So if you're rushing through things and you're not really taking the time to train up your users to fully understand, the changes that are going to take place in your day-to-day job, and you're not able to fully adopt the system, then rushing to a go live date isn't really going to give you that full benefit that you're looking to accomplish, and that you kind of set that goal at the start of the project to accomplish.
Yeah. Well said. I mean, there is a lot of seasonality, it seems, in these smaller businesses, and you hit on a couple things. You talked about requirements, you talked about user acceptance testing, and for those that don't know, UAT, user acceptance testing, that's the point where the rubber meets the road right before go live of a new system, where you would actually play out scenarios in the test environment to basically try to simulate running your business in the system the way it's been configured and built, so that you can test it and make sure it works from a business perspective. But you need heavy involvement from your people. And to your point, Geordie, the last thing you want to do is do that at your peak, seasonal time of year. So a lot of times you have to plan around that and say, okay, it's not going to take 90 days like NetSuite says it's going to take. It's actually going to take 6 or 9 months maybe. And that's okay. I think a lot of times people have this negative connotation of like, oh my gosh, vendor thinks this, but we're thinking this, we're totally off base and we must be doing something wrong. You're not doing anything wrong. It's just the vendors are thinking of it from a pure technology perspective, whereas you have to think about it from a business perspective of how's that technology going to fit in your business and how you're going to get it to work from an operational perspective. What about, Nate, you kind of gave an example a minute ago, so I'll ask you this, Geordie, in terms of a real world example of, can you give us an example of a recent small business ERP project that you thought went particularly well, or you thought maybe the client made particularly good decisions around how to go about the process?
Yeah, there was one in particular where they were a food distribution company, moving off of QuickBooks, like we mentioned, and lots of Excel spreadsheets, and they just had no real access into inventory availability. So they started looking at going through a selection. Their top 3 that they ended up with was Acumatica, Sage, and NetSuite. And they ended up going with NetSuite, and they had to kind of add on some warehouse management system functionality. But with that, they were able to then have more of this information on availability, when they can deliver their goods to people that are purchasing it, things like that. So they didn't have to have as many meetings. I do remember them mentioning they didn't have to send as many emails or schedule as many meetings to make sure that everyone was on the same page and communicating the information to their clients in a timely manner. It just allowed them to have more accessibility into the information they needed and the information that was wanted. So that's one aspect and one small business kind of real life story that was really successful. And the main takeaway was that they just got to eliminate lots of those manual processes, picking up the phone and giving someone a call within their organization.
Yeah. That's a really interesting one. And it's also interesting because you mentioned some specific systems that are out there for smaller businesses that they can consider. And that, I think maybe that's another thing, just to build on what you said, Geordie, just a kind of a word of advice to the small businesses out there. In that, there's a lot of really good options. The good thing about being in the small market is that you have so many different options of what types of systems you could go with. I mean, there's a lot of, obviously, the big names like Microsoft Dynamics and SAP and Oracle, but they're not necessarily built for smaller businesses. But you do have, you've got Oracle NetSuite, you've got someone on the stream just a moment ago mentioned Microsoft Business Central. SAP has their Business One product that's more for the smaller companies. Acumatica, DCOM, Odoo. There's a lot of Sage. I think you mentioned Sage too, Geordie. So there's a lot of different systems that are out there. And so you just want to do your research. And that's why, I encourage you again to take advantage of our free assessment for small businesses. I'll put the QR code up here once again, but scan that QR code if you want to get a free assessment of your small business situation. We're happy to help. And we're really trying to open this up to the community, just because a lot of times small businesses are limited or constrained in their ability to use consultants. So that's part of why we offer this free assessment, and we can get you started on the right track. And we just do it for companies that are less than 75 million in revenue. So happy to do that for you if you just scan that QR code. I'm also going to put up a new QR code in a second for the transformation report, the digital transformation report, because someone mentioned in the chat that the QR code wasn't working. It was given an error. So I'm going to put it up. I have a new one here that I'll put up in just a moment. So try that free assessment. There's the QR code. You can rewind if you missed this, or go to the link below after the fact. And then I'll put up the QR code, the new QR code for the transformation report. So scan that right there. That should work now, but let me know if it doesn't. Thank you to whoever it was. Someone in the chat mentioned that it wasn't working. So apologies for that. So back to the questions here, though. What about change management? Now, this is a topic, it's sort of like AI. It's like you can't have one of these conversations without talking about AI or change management. I feel like those are two universal things that always come up, but we haven't really talked about it yet. We've sort of danced around it or touched on it a little bit, but change management, oftentimes I think people think of as like a big company, nice to have. Like, I'll do change management that if I have the resources, the extra time, the extra money. But small businesses struggle with change as well, just getting people to come along for the change and come along for the ride, and getting them to fully adopt this software so that you get business value out of your investments there. But how does change management differ with smaller businesses compared to big companies, would you say, Nate? Let's start with you.
Yeah, and I think you hit on I think the key is that when you have larger organizations, there's more of I'm not going to say an appetite, but there's more of a interest in change management. But I think change management's critical on any engagement, and it's just the degree in which you engage the change management and what steps you're looking at. So for any engagement, no matter whether it's a organization that's at 20 million or it's a $4.5 billion organization, communication's key. So your communication channels are setting those up early and having very precise and concise communications to all the organizations at a very set time and a set manner. If you're going to communicate to the shop floor differently than how you're going to communicate to the executive team, but having those regularly scheduled, very short and concise communications is critical no matter what your size of your organization. The second, I think, that's as important is the readiness. So whether you're, again, organization that has 20 employees or whether you have 20,000 employees, it's really sitting down and saying, what sort of skill sets do you have the right people in place? And then do they have the right skill sets in place to adapt to the new technology and the new way of doing business? And I think that's far overlooked on most of our clients, is you just assume that you put the new technology in place and everyone's going to be able to adapt to it immediately. You have very sharp people that have gotten you to where you're going to be, but they might need to learn new skill sets, and the organization's going to operate differently because you're going to come from a very reactionary mindset to a very proactive mindset. You're going to have the ability to start looking forward instead of just doing a lot of manual processes to catch up. And then I think really the other overlooked component, no matter what the size of the organization for change management, is learning and training. You have to have a really good mechanism in place, not only to learn the technology as it's going to be implemented, but to continually be training your employees, your new employees, and your organization as you implement new technology, as you incorporate new technology into the one that you implemented. You just need to have that constant training and teaching mentality and learning mentality in place. And you need to have the right tools in place as well.
Yeah. Makes sense. Good advice. How about you, Geordie? Anything you'd add to that as far as change management from a small business perspective?
And yeah, you can tell Nate is a change management expert. He nailed lots of those there. I would just say that when you bring in technology and you start to eliminate manual processes, oftentimes that frees up lots of time and availability for your employees. And with that, there can also be the fear aspect where your employees now start to question their value for the company. So I would say that just communicating, now that you have this open time and this availability, this is how we can utilize you to then continue to bring value to the company, rather than, because oftentimes that fear creeps in, am I going to get laid off? Am I going to get fired? Things like that. So really getting out in front of that and, expressing that with this newfound efficiency, we can now have open time to start to focus on other business activities that maybe were put on the back burner when you were working through those manual processes. So really getting out in front of the training, the communication, and just looking to continue to add value to the business and instilling some comfort in your employees that the change isn't necessarily going to replace you, but it's going to free you up to then allow you to chase down other activities that fit your skill set, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really, really good point. I mean, it's also something that you just triggered in my mind, Geordie, as you were saying that, is that, one of the challenges that small businesses have that the bigger companies don't have, that's really important and really powerful is, typically in smaller businesses, people feel like they're more part of how the company was built or is being built. And so they have a sort of pride of ownership, maybe more so than a big company where you're just a cog in a machine or you're just one of 1,000 employees. Whereas at a small company, if you're one of 20 or one of 50 people or whatever it is, you just feel more ownership. You have more influence over the organization. And so that's a good thing, right? And that creates a certain amount of loyalty and motivation and things like that, it's hard to replicate it at a smaller or at a larger organization. But now if you bring in an ERP system from the outside that sort of disrupts all that and takes away some of what was built in that pride of ownership with, the influence that these employees have, that can actually backfire more for a small company, because what was once a strength is now turning into a liability, because now there's more fear and resistance of change because they're used to having such ownership and influence over how the business is being built. So it gets back to a point I think you made. One of you guys, or maybe both of you guys, made the point early on about just getting people involved early on. You really need them to be part of the solution, probably even more so than a larger company, because it is such pride of ownership there. I have to. I was telling these guys before we went live with this podcast that lately the stream is going viral on YouTube. I don't know why, but on YouTube lately, this stream every week is getting more and more a bigger audience. So with that bigger audience comes some random comments, but I'm finding that if I just pick one random comment per session, it can actually be fun. Last week, for example, someone asked, "Do you believe in aliens?" And we actually pulled the question up and we talked about it. So I'm going to pull up this kind of strange comment. No offense to the person that put it. Teach me to sell, server daddies, from Marissa on YouTube. The only reason I bring this up is because it did trigger a thought in my mind. We're not going to teach you to sell on this live stream, so I'm sorry if you're expecting that. And I don't know what a server daddy is. Maybe that's an age generational thing that I'm just not following. But the reason I bring that comment up, even though it's kind of funny and different, is that it brings up the whole idea of CRM, customer relationship management, and how that's an example of, if you're trying to grow top line revenue growth, one example of a way you can implement new technology that maybe isn't full, complete ERP, but it's one piece of your business that could be improved pretty dramatically. And that would be CRM. So do you guys see that at all, where you get clients who come to us and say, "Hey, we don't necessarily want a full-blown ERP system that does everything. We just want a CRM system, or we just want, a piece of an ERP system," or what have you typically seen there, Nate?
Yeah, and I was thinking about this when we were given an earlier example. We had a client probably about 4 years ago when we were first, when Third Stage was kind of more in its infancy, and they were originally wanted they hired us to help them with a pretty big ERP implementation. It was going to kind of change the way their organization handled their finance and that sort of thing. They were a very membership-based, customer-based organization. And through our executive visioning and some of our early sessions with them, we figured out that they really needed to put less of an emphasis. They still needed to put a financial package in place, but really they needed to focus more around their CRM. They had a very subscription-based business model. And so we really turned the focus away from the financial piece, which was still really important, but more to how they did their day-to-day business and what would enable them to sell better, to engage their members better, to give their members more access to this subscription-based sales and delivery method. So I think it's really important when we talk about if you have an ERP or if you have some piece of technology in mind, make sure that is really what's going to be the best technology enabler to let you grow your business and scale your business. What's going to help you the most to get to where you want to go.
Yeah. It's good advice. And Geordie, what about cost? When we think about the cost of these projects for small business, what are some of the hidden costs that you've seen some of our small and mid-market clients struggle with or get surprised by?
Yeah, I think when you look at cost, you need to think of the implementation cost, the license cost, and then also the ongoing support cost as well. So many times clients will just look at the implementation cost or just the licensing cost, but really looking at that total cost of ownership is what's going to allow you to start to envision how you're going to be able to pay for or move forward with a transformation. And also, we've mentioned a little bit about the change management piece, some of that training and other things that go into an implementation. That's going to give you your best insight into your total cost rather than just, one quick number and then kind of overlooking all the other aspects. So looking into that and also really walking through your contracts before you're signing them. There's room for negotiation. That's something that we kind of add into our selection projects that we're a part of is, advocating for our clients and really digging into the contracts and using, the best practices that we've learned or the industry experience that we've learned to really dig into contracts and understand that there typically is quite a bit of wiggle room in these contracts to negotiate and try to make a deal that's best suited for your business and your company.
Yeah, that's really good. And, that brings up another thought around, with software as a service or cloud-based software, there's a lot of hidden escalators in those contracts, to your point. You want to negotiate those contracts and there's a lot of wiggle room, but you also want to make sure you understand what exactly you're committing to, because the software as a service and cloud software model has a way of unintentionally or maybe it is intentional, I don't know. But I think it's unintentional, where it's sort of creating a hostage situation where, over time it gets so expensive because now you've got more transactions, you've got more users, you've got more modules, more data is being processed, whatever. I mean, there's all these kickers that will cause the cost to go up. And guess what? There's no de-escalators in those contracts. There's nothing in there that'll say, oh, it could actually go down over time. It's always going to go up. And so negotiating that stuff ahead of time and thinking about, well, it's not just what we're purchasing for today, but what are we purchasing for 2, 3, 5 years from now? And recognizing and negotiating that too, locking in at a certain cap or whatever it is, and negotiating for the future, not just where you are today. I think that's really important too. And just as a follow-up here from Marissa on YouTube, Marissa was hoping to finally pass that Sell Me the Pencil test today, but even though we're not going to provide you input for that here today, we can talk about CRM systems, which might help you sell the pencil. And then Marissa was also asking if this is actually live. So I can confirm that this is indeed live. Okay, so for small businesses that are considering ERP today, and I'll start with you on this one, Nate. Small businesses considering ERP today, what's the one piece of advice you'd give them to set the stage for long-term success and just to get started on the right foot?
Yeah, I would say the one piece of, that I would say is stretch as much as you can, but don't try and bite everything off in one shot. To explain that a little deeper, do as much as you can now with your go live. If you raise the bar, push the edge of the envelope, all those sayings, but don't try to do so much that you're going to overwhelm all of your resources and all of your organization, and really take a step back as far as day-to-day operations to put the new technology in place. So I say that because we have organizations that come in and want to nail their reporting requirements right at the beginning. They want to set up their dashboards, their reports, everything else. I would say get a system in, get it functioning, get comfortable with it, and then hit that optimization phase 6 to 9 months down the road, where you're really going to start saying, we have a good grasp of the system, we have an understanding of what it can do. Now we're really going to start putting the reports in place, the dashboards in place, and the functionality in place that's going to allow us to go further. If you overload at the beginning, you're really doing yourself a disservice. And if you try and if you don't really push it as much as you can, you're gonna find that you're probably not taking advantage of what you should. So it's a delicate balance, but I would say don't try and bite off too much, especially given the fact that your organization's growing and you're already stretching your resources thin to start off with.
It's great advice. And going slow or starting slow is okay. You can speed up later, but it's a lot harder to try slowing down later and getting yourself into a lot of trouble and wasting a lot of money in the process. What would you add to that, Geordie? What's the one piece of advice you'd give to a small business team that's getting ready to start a technology initiative, or at least consider one?
Really start to take a look at your readiness and how prepared you are to go through a transformation. So take a look at, we mentioned a lot of the executive strategy, get aligned. What is the direction that you're trying to march towards? What do you want to be when you grow up? What does the future look like? And then start to really define the steps on how you can get there. Make note of your pain points, things that you need to target. Also, ahead of a transformation, start to look at some of your data. If you have a messy, a jumble of data, that's something that you're going to need to address, and taking a look at things like that before the transformation, really getting aligned and prepared for a transformation is only going to make it easier, especially when you have such a lean team. You can only really take on so many things at once. So preparing and really focusing on that readiness beforehand is something that I've seen lots of success with.
Yeah, great point. And the time you take to get ready and to get all on the same page, define your requirements, having a clear roadmap, that time you take up front to do that is going to speed things up so much more later on. It's going to save you a lot of time and money long term, even though you might be tempted or enticed by software vendors to try and speed things up and go, buy now. That's going to cost you a lot more, and it's going to lead to a lot more chaos than if you sort of do what you guys are saying, which is back up and sort of take your time to get things right and get things in order before you go too fast. I mean, that's a tricky part of the small business, because a lot of times small businesses do move fast. I mean, that's their bias is they're going to move fast, they're nimble, and that's good. That's a strength of the company. But when it comes to something like this, you want to have a clear roadmap and direction. And of course, my suggestion here is, if you're interested in what I think, as far as, no one asked me, but I'll answer it anyway. What I would say for first steps, if you're a small business owner or a small business team that's looking to get started on a technology journey, go ahead and scan this QR code right here for a free assessment. We'll do that free assessment for you, get you started on the right foot. Tech agnostic. We don't sell software, so we're not trying to convince you to do anything with technology necessarily. But having said that, we do work with all the major ERP systems out there, and we know them really well. So feel free to check out that assessment, regardless of where you are in the journey. We'd be happy to give you some free advice on how to track that journey. I'll leave that QR code up for a second here while we're wrapping up. But great conversation here, and I think this is hopefully helpful to the audience here. I appreciate you guys sharing all your feedback and all of your knowledge and insights on what it takes to succeed in these sorts of projects for small and mid-sized companies. All right. Thank you, Nate and Geordie. Great conversation and really good audience questions as well. So thank you for that. And we're going to pull on a few threads and build on some of the topics we just talked about here in just a moment. So stick around, and we're also going to get into how to know if you're overpaying for tech consultants and what you can do about it. So be sure to stick around, and we're going to get to all that and more here on Transformation Ground Control. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more.
Just tell me what you've got to say to me. I've been waiting for so long to hear the truth.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
I want to invite you to join me and other thought leaders in the digital transformation space to Stratosphere 2025. It's an annual conference we've hosted now for 7 years in a row. It's a great event. It's live in Denver, Colorado, but we're also offering it virtually via hybrid tickets. And we're going to have a lot of different speakers here, including myself as a keynote, as well as others that you may know from the industry. And this is a perfect conference if you're interested in any sort of digital transformation, including ERP and CRM and HCM. And actually, the theme for this year's session is AI and how AI is affecting all different types of digital transformation. But in addition to AI, we'll also talk about the fundamentals of digital transformation, including program management, evaluating the right software,
digital strategy, change management, process improvement, all the things you need to know to make your project successful. It's also a great way to network and learn from others. So just being part of a community that is also like-minded and going through the same things you are, that's another value. And you can join, like I said, remotely, in person, and you can also buy VIP tickets if you'd like more exclusive access to me and others from the Third Stage team and other speakers that are going to be there. So I hope to see you soon. Check out my discount code below for discounted tickets. You can go to stratosphere2025.com for more information, including the full agenda, and I hope to see you there.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 221. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this podcast, this tech agnostic digital transformation podcast, every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. So, Darian, we just had Nate and Geordie on the show. We're talking about small business ERP implementations. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that?
Yeah, I thought it was a great conversation overall. I definitely have some follow-up questions and kind of just want to expand on everything you guys were talking about. One of them being some common missteps that you guys were talking about. All of you guys kind of emphasized that rushing the process and ignoring internal readiness are big mistakes that a lot of companies can make. But what is the early red flag that tells you that a business is at risk or of failure or a chaotic implementation?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I think first of all, a lot of organizations don't see the risk or failure points until it's already happening. So, usually you don't see it. You have to measure underneath the surface and you have to dig below the surface of what's really happening to sort of see it. And what I mean by that is if you look at, like, if you're in the middle of a project right now and you were to give me a kind of a project status report and I ask you for all this stuff, I ask you for a status report, give me the last steering committee update you gave, let me see your project plan and all the revisions you've done over time. Let me see the requirements documentation. I could kind of look at all these deliverables and outputs you've created in the project along the way, and you can start to see where the risks are. You can start to see the things that are going well and where you're on the right track, and then you'll start to see other things that maybe aren't being felt yet, but are going to lead to pain later on. Like, for example, user acceptance testing. We might be in the design stage of a project, but if I see a project plan, well, let's say we're in the design stage, we're in the requirements stage. Everything's on track. We're on target. We're on budget so far. But then I see later in the project, there's only 2 rounds of user acceptance testing. That tells me that's a huge risk right there because that's not enough. Usually you need more rounds and iterations of user acceptance testing to make sure you've worked out all the kinks. So right now it feels like everything's going fine. Everything's great. But I know downstream there's a problem. And if we don't adjust that and reset expectations for how long that's going to take and what the real timeline is, then we're going to run into that problem later. So that's the key is getting ahead of it and knowing and anticipating. And that's why, that's why people hire us, to be honest, they hire Third Stage because we know where the risks are. And we're also not there to sugarcoat things too, because a lot of times the software vendors and even internal executives at companies, a lot of times are trying to just present themselves in the best light. So they aren't good at grading themselves or being too hard on themselves, especially the software vendors. I mean, they partially because they don't want the bad rap, but also partially because they're looking at things myopically through the technology lens, and they're not thinking about necessarily what's this going to look like on the other side for this business. They just look at, does the technology work technically? They don't necessarily look at, is this actually going to work for the business? Is it going to get full value from it? That sort of thing. So those are some of the nuances or tricky parts of it, but you just have to have tech agnostic advisors that can help you identify those risks and not worry about, sugarcoating things and not worry about hurting anyone's feelings. You're just there trying to make things better. So that'd be my recommendation, is look at a company like Third Stage to help you with that.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely a useful asset to have in that process. Now let's play a video asking if you are overpaying for digital consulting services. This is a question you get asked a lot, so you decided to make a video about it. So let's roll that clip.
I've been in the consulting industry now for about 25 years. I've worked with over 1,000 different clients in my career, helping them through their digital transformations. One of the common themes that I see when working with these different organizations is that when they're going through ERP projects and digital transformations and AI projects, supply chain improvement projects, oftentimes they bring in a big consulting firm, a big system integrator, or a big team of outside technical consultants. And those consultants have somewhat of an open checkbook. They just spend and bill money like there's no tomorrow, and there's no accountability and oversight of those consultants. So what I want to do today is talk about the ways that consultants might be wasting your money on your projects, and talk about the things you can do to remediate that and make your project more effective and efficient, and make sure that you're taking accountability and ownership for those consultants, and ultimately, at the end of the day, optimizing the amount of money that you spend on your digital transformation. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to share a little bit of information about Third Stage Consulting and who we are. Third Stage Consulting Group is an independent, technology agnostic provider of consulting services to help clients through their digital transformations. We help with digital strategy and software selection, as well as implementation planning. And during implementation, we provide services related to program management, organizational change, business process improvement, as well as enterprise architecture. These are just some of the services we provide. We have offices in North America as well as Europe and Asia Pacific. So if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to check out our resource center, which includes a number of resources that will help you through your digital transformation, and you can access that for free using the QR code here or the links below. You can also reach out to me directly if you'd like to discuss your digital transformation and brainstorm ideas on how to improve where you're headed on your journey. Now let's jump back into today's content. One of the key challenges in overspending that organizations have with consultants is that the consultants ignore the strategic priorities and focus of the organization. In other words, consultants too often come in with a cookie cutter approach. They've got their pre-configured best practices. They've got the technology built the way that they're used to using it, but that doesn't necessarily align with the way you as an organization need to operate. And that's one of the big challenges that I see in the industry, is that when you look at software vendors and the technical consultants, the system integrators that come into your business, too often they're coming in with that canned solution that may or may not fit what you're trying to do as an organization. Instead, what the good consultants, the better consultants should be doing is looking at understanding, who are you as an organization? What are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to be when you grow up? Where are you today? How are we going to fill that gap? There's no one-size-fits-all answer to these digital transformations, yet these technology consultants tend to focus on the one-size-fits-all answers. And that is a recipe for failure, because their answer, their canned, predefined solution that they generally come in with and lead with, is generally not going to be aligned with most organizations' strategic priorities. It's going to be aligned with how they're used to building, but it's not going to be designed to fit your business as an organization. And this is where organizations and why organizations tend to hire Third Stage Consulting, our team at Third Stage Consulting, so often, is because we do the exact opposite. Because we're tech agnostic, because we don't sell software, we're not here to pitch any one software or deploy any one software one certain way.
Instead, what we do is we back up and step away from technology and look at what is it you need? What is your strategy? Who are you? What are you trying to accomplish? What's your culture? What's your operational strategy? What is your long-term growth strategy? And from there, you define a digital strategy and a roadmap and a software evaluation and a deployment plan that fits who you are. If we come in with a predefined answer, I can almost guarantee you it's going to be wrong. It's not going to fit you and what you need, but yet that's what most technology consultants do. So one of the biggest ways you can save money and how you spend your money on consultants is to invest in a consulting partner that truly understands your strategy and what it is you're trying to accomplish and defines a roadmap and an execution plan that's built on that, not just based on what they're used to or what they're comfortable with. Another way that organizations spend way too much money on consultants is they hire consultants that focus way too much on technology. They are determined to deploy technology throughout as much of your organization as possible, come hell or high water. Doesn't matter if it fits or not, doesn't matter if it's the right solution for you. These consultants are trained and incentivized to deploy as much technology as possible through your organization. Back when I was at PricewaterhouseCoopers at one of the big four consulting firms, that's exactly what we did. We were incentivized to ensure that organizations deployed as much SAP software as they could through the entire organization. When it came to third-party bolt-ons or independent solutions, third-party solutions, independent consultants, we were trained to keep them out because that was a threat to us, because our job was to expand that footprint and ensure that we were praying and worshiping the SAP gods. And that's what we did. That's what we're incentivized for. And this isn't just the SAP world. It's also ERP vendors in general, especially the bigger ones. The system integrators, the implementation partners, the technical consultants are all trained and incentivized to ensure that you use as much of that technology as possible. Now, don't get me wrong. If there's one technology that can solve all of your problems throughout your organization, certainly deploy that. That's great. But it's so rare that that happens, that one solution is going to solve all of your problems and give you everything you need. Chances are fairly high, especially if you're a larger, more complex, diverse organization, chances are very high that you're going to need other third-party solutions. The problem is the technical consultants that are guiding you are more likely to suggest that that's a bad idea, and you should just stick with the one core solution that they're there to implement for you. And that leads to a lot of money, not just on their services, but on the disruption and the risk and the pain of deploying a technology through your entire organization that doesn't necessarily fit. That's where the risk is. That's where the cost comes from. So technology consultants that spend too much time on technology itself, that's part of the problem and part of why organizations are spending way too much money on consultants. And if they would do less of that, they could save a lot of money on their deployments. In the early stages of a digital transformation or ERP project, organizations and their consulting partners typically have to define their future state business processes, the business requirements, and all the things that are important inputs into the design of the technology. It's fair enough, makes a lot of sense, right? That's something that every organization has to do. But the problem is that consultants oftentimes spend way too much time defining processes and requirements in a very manual way. They conduct these workshops and they go back and do a ton of documentation, which is important. You need to have that documentation. But in today's day and age, there's so many automated tools that will enable a better way to do that. For example, at Third Stage Consulting, we use an AI tool that actually tracks and monitors and records every requirements gathering session we do and have. And the AI tool automatically creates an immediate first draft of the business requirements based on those conversations. So we're spending a lot less time billing by the hour, being inefficient, and manually documenting these different business processes and business requirements and all the things that are important inputs into a successful implementation. And we start that process during the evaluation and selection process, and we continue that through the design and build of software to ensure that we have a solid set of requirements and a blueprint to help manage the system integrator and manage the technical resources to ensure that the organization and the clients aren't spending too much money on those consulting firms to design and build the software. So one thing you want to look at is really lift the hood and look underneath the surface of what your software consultants are doing, how much time and money they're spending on these manual activities, and really challenge and question if there's better ways for them to be doing that. And what they often do is they'll either offshore and or hire really junior consulting resources that are still charging by the hour and a fairly high rate, but they'll bring on these low-cost resources to do all the manual work that's required to design and build the software. But in reality, there's enough tools out there that could automate that entirely to where you shouldn't be paying for that. So if you're paying money for a ton of process documentation, a ton of requirements documentation, chances are you're over investing in low value activities that can be automated. Now, finally, another way organizations waste a lot of money on consultants is they hire consultants that don't have much experience. They hire junior consultants that they feel like they're paying a lower rate for, but in reality, those junior consultants are going to take so much time and money to get to the same answer that a more senior, higher hourly cost resource could do much faster. And that's a way that organizations are wasting a lot of time and money on their projects as well. And this is the big consulting model, by the way. They have the senior people that will sell you the project, but then they've got an army of junior people that are just out of college or maybe 3 to 5 years out of university. And those low-cost people will still bill you a couple $100 an hour to do the work that needs to be done, but they are generally more expensive because they're so inefficient. There's such a lack of knowledge with what they do, and they rely on so many other more senior people to help them and be a crutch for the work that they do. So you've really got to look at your consulting partner to ensure that the people that are selling your project aren't just handing this project off to lower, more junior resources that may not know what they're doing, that may seem like you're saving money on paper, but in reality, you're going to spend a lot more money because not only are you spending more hours for those people to figure out what in the world they're doing, but the quality of the work they do is generally a lot lower and leads to a lot of rework. So that all adds up to a lot of costs. And so by hiring these big firms that have a lot of junior resources on the project, that's actually going to cost you more money in the long term.
There's a lot of great stuff in there about paying for digital consulting services. And if any of these resonate with our listeners, I'm sure they know who to reach out to for help. Well, that wraps up today's episode of Transformation Ground Control. Stay connected and watch previous episodes over at transformationgroundcontrol.com.